There's a type of person who walks into a room and immediately notices something everyone else missed. The slight tension between two people who are pretending everything is fine. The subtle shift in someone's tone that signals something is wrong before a single word about it has been said. This same person goes home after a social event and replays conversations in their head for hours. They need time alone to recover because they have processed everything so thoroughly that they need quiet to decompress. They feel other people's emotions in a way that makes it difficult sometimes to know where another person's feelings end and their own begin. High sensitivity is not a disorder. It is a genuine, biologically rooted personality trait that affects approximately 15 to 20% of the human population. It is real enough that it has been studied consistently in psychological research for decades. So what is it exactly? And what does it actually feel like from the inside? Subscribe to Freud Mind and let us get into it. The term highly sensitive person, or HSP, was introduced by psychologist Elaine Aron in the 1990s, based on research she began after noticing in herself and others a consistent pattern of traits that did not fit neatly into existing personality categories. Aron's research, and the work of other psychologists who followed, identified high sensitivity as a trait defined by what researchers call sensory processing sensitivity, a deeper-than-average processing of sensory, emotional, and social information by the nervous system. The key word in that description is deeper. This is not about sensitivity in the everyday sense of being emotionally fragile or easily offended. It is about the depth at which the nervous system processes information coming in from the environment and from other people. A highly sensitive person is not necessarily more reactive in the sense of being more dramatic or more expressive. They are more thorough. The processing goes further, engages more connections, draws in more context, and takes longer to complete. Aron developed a framework for understanding this trait using the acronym DOES, which stands for Depth of Processing, Overstimulation, Emotional Reactivity, and Empathy, and Sensing the Subtle. These four elements together describe what high sensitivity actually is and why it produces the experiences it does. Depth of processing means that HSPs tend to think about information more thoroughly before acting. They connect new information to existing knowledge and past experience more extensively. They consider more angles, more implications, more potential outcomes. This is useful. It often produces careful, thoughtful decision-making and deep understanding of complex situations. But it also means that processing takes longer and requires more cognitive resources, which is part of why HSPs can find highly stimulating environments so draining. Overstimulation is the natural consequence of deeper processing. If every piece of incoming information is processed more thoroughly, then environments with a lot of incoming information, noisy places, crowded spaces, busy social situations, rapid change, create more cognitive load than they do for people whose processing is less deep. The overstimulation is not a phobia or an anxiety response. It is the genuine experience of a nervous system that is doing more work per unit of input than the average nervous system. Emotional reactivity and empathy means that HSPs tend to feel emotions more intensely, both their own and, significantly, other people's. They are often highly empathic in a way that goes beyond intellectual understanding of another person's situation. They seem to physically feel the emotional states of those around them, which is both a remarkable social asset and a genuinely exhausting experience in emotionally charged environments. Sensing the subtle means that HSPs tend to notice things that others miss. Small changes in facial expression, micro shifts in someone's tone of voice, the way a room feels slightly different from usual, textures, smells, sounds at the edges of perception that most people filter out automatically. This capacity for noticing detail is part of the same nervous system depth that produces the other features of the trait. One of the most characteristic experiences of highly sensitive people is noticing changes in other people's emotional states before those people have acknowledged them, or sometimes before they are even consciously aware of them themselves. You walk into a conversation and something is slightly off. The person seems fine on the surface. They are saying the right things, maintaining eye contact, showing no obvious distress. But there is something in the quality of their energy that is different from usual. A fraction of a second of eye contact that doesn't quite hold the way it normally does. A barely perceptible tightness around the mouth. The tiniest flatness in their voice where there is usually warmth. Most people miss these signals entirely. For highly sensitive people, they land clearly and immediately, and they create an internal response. You feel slightly unsettled without being entirely sure why. Something is not right, even though everything appears to be fine. This capacity is not mystical. It is the product of a nervous system that is processing social and emotional information at a deeper level than average, picking up on the micro-expressions, the vocal micro-variations, the subtle body language cues that exist in all human communication, but that most people's nervous systems filter out as irrelevant. The highly sensitive person's nervous system does not filter these out. It collects them, processes them, and generates an emotional response to the information they contain. Research on empathy and mirror neuron activity, the neural systems involved in simulating other people's emotional states, suggests that highly sensitive people show greater activation in these systems when observing others' emotional experiences. They are not just intellectually registering that someone is sad or anxious. Their nervous system is actually simulating that experience to some degree, which is why being around people in distress can be genuinely physically draining for an HSP in a way that it is not for most people. Loud or noisy environments are one of the most commonly mentioned challenges for highly sensitive people, and the reason they are draining goes back to the core feature of the trait: depth of processing. In a noisy environment, a restaurant with loud music, a party with overlapping conversations, an open-plan office with constant ambient noise, a highly sensitive nervous system is doing significantly more work than a less sensitive one. Every sound that registers gets processed. The brain is continuously trying to sort signal from noise, to make sense of the auditory environment, to maintain attention in the face of constantly arriving stimulation. For most people, this background processing is relatively automatic and low cost. For HSPs, it is more thorough and therefore more costly. The result is that after an hour in a noisy environment, a highly sensitive person has spent considerably more cognitive resources on managing stimulation than the average person in the same room. They may appear completely normal, engaged, social, functional. But underneath the surface, the processing load has been accumulating, and the fatigue it produces is real and physical, not just emotional or psychological. This is why highly sensitive people typically need quiet time after noisy or busy experiences, not as a preference or a social choice, but as a genuine physiological need. The nervous system needs time without high-input stimulation to recover from the processing load of high-stimulation periods. Quiet, low-stimulation environments are not just pleasant for HSPs, they are necessary. The same dynamic applies to any kind of overwhelming sensory environment. Bright lights that are too harsh, strong smells that most people barely notice, clothing textures that create constant minor irritation, temperature extremes. These sensory inputs are all processed more thoroughly by the highly sensitive nervous system, and the cumulative load of managing them is part of what makes certain environments so draining. After a social event, even one that was genuinely enjoyable, many highly sensitive people need significant time alone to decompress. This is one of the most commonly misunderstood aspects of high sensitivity, frequently confused with introversion. Introversion and high sensitivity are not the same thing, though they often overlap. Introversion is a personality dimension relating to where someone draws their social energy from. Introverts recharge alone, extroverts recharge through social interaction. High sensitivity is a different dimension entirely. It relates to the depth of information processing. There are highly sensitive extroverts, people who genuinely love social interaction and draw energy from it, but who still need recovery time after particularly stimulating social experiences because of the processing load involved. The need for alone time after social events, for an HSP, is not about disliking the people they were with or finding the experience negative. It is about the amount of information that a social event generates. Every conversation carries emotional content to be processed. Every interaction involves reading multiple levels of communication simultaneously. Every person in the room represents a source of emotional and social information that the highly sensitive nervous system is continuously monitoring. After several hours of this, the processing backlog is real, and quiet time is the only way to work through it. Many highly sensitive people describe coming home after a social event and needing to sit quietly for a period before they can fully relax. They might replay conversations, examining them, looking for things they noticed but did not fully process in the moment, thinking about what someone meant, wondering whether they said the right thing. This replaying is often involuntary, not a choice but an automatic continuation of the processing that started during the event and needs to complete. Criticism is one of the experiences that highly sensitive people often find disproportionately difficult. And understanding why requires understanding the depth of processing dimension of the trait. When most people receive criticism, they process it, consider it, decide whether it is fair, accept or reject it, and move on. When a highly sensitive person receives criticism, they tend to process it much more deeply. They examine their past behavior in the light of it. They connect it to other things they know or worry about themselves. They think about what it might mean not just for the specific situation, but for how they are perceived more generally. They feel the emotional weight of it, not just the intellectual content of the feedback, but the full emotional experience of having been found lacking in some way. The result is that criticism lands harder and lasts longer for HSPs than it does for most people, not because they are fragile or oversensitive in a pejorative sense, but because their processing is thorough enough that the full implications of the criticism get explored in a way that shallow processing would not produce. A comment that most people absorb and forget within hours can sit with an HSP for days, being turned over, examined, connected to memories and fears and beliefs about themselves. This depth of response to criticism is not all negative. The same thorough processing that makes criticism painful also means that HSPs tend to take feedback seriously, reflect genuinely on their behavior, and improve in response to it in ways that less reflective processing would not produce. The problem is not the reflection. It is when the reflection does not stop at a useful point and instead becomes rumination, cycling through the same material repeatedly without resolution. One of the most striking manifestations of high sensitivity is the ability to notice sensory details that most people simply do not register. The hum of a fluorescent light, the slight roughness of a fabric tag inside a shirt, the distant sound of a television in another room, the subtle smell of something in the air that nobody else seems to detect, the way the tone of a piece of music shifts in a way that produces a physical, emotional response. These are not things that highly sensitive people are choosing to pay attention to. They are things that their nervous system brings to conscious awareness, while most people's nervous systems file them in the background or filter them out entirely. This heightened sensory awareness is a mixed experience. On one side, it means that highly sensitive people often have a rich and detailed relationship with sensory and aesthetic experiences: music, art, nature, food, the physical world. They tend to appreciate subtle beauty that most people pass without noticing, a particular quality of light at a certain time of day, the specific feeling of a piece of music that moves from tension to resolution, the smell of rain on warm ground. These experiences land with a richness and depth that is genuinely pleasurable and meaningful. On the other side, Negative sensory experiences are equally amplified. Physical discomfort that most people barely register becomes genuinely difficult to ignore. Environmental noise that most people tune out remains in the foreground. The sensory detail that produces beauty also produces discomfort when the inputs are unpleasant. This is why highly sensitive people often make careful choices about their environments in ways that might look like fussiness to people who do not share the underlying experience. The environment is not equally experienced by everyone in it. For an HSP, the details of the environment matter more because the nervous system is actually registering them and processing them. There is a particular quality of focus that highly sensitive people can achieve when they are genuinely engaged with something they care about. An absorption that becomes so complete that the outside world effectively disappears. When an HSP is interested in something, a book, a piece of music, a project, a conversation, an idea, the depth of processing that can be a burden in overstimulating environments becomes an extraordinary gift. They go deep. They notice things that others miss. They make connections that a more surface-level engagement would not produce. They become genuinely absorbed in a way that produces both deep understanding and deep enjoyment. This capacity for absorption is one of the most consistently reported positive aspects of being highly sensitive. HSPs often describe losing track of time when engaged with something meaningful, hours passing in what feels like minutes, a quality of focused flow that is both productive and deeply pleasurable. They tend to be thorough and detail-oriented in their work, noticing nuances and implications that less thorough processors overlook. In creative work, in research, in any field that rewards depth and attention, the highly sensitive nervous system is an asset. The challenge is that this same depth of absorption means that interruptions are more disruptive. Being pulled out of deep focus by an unexpected disturbance is more jarring for someone who was more deeply absorbed. Switching rapidly between tasks is more cognitively costly for someone whose natural mode of engagement is deep rather than broad. The relationship between high sensitivity and emotion is one of the most significant dimensions of the trait, and it works in both directions. Highly sensitive people tend to feel their own emotions more intensely than average. Joy is deeper. Sadness is heavier. The impact of a beautiful piece of music, a moving film, a touching story is stronger and more physical. HSPs cry more easily at art, feel more moved by beauty, experience aesthetic emotions with a vividness that non-HSPs often find disproportionate. This is not performance or affectation. The emotional response is genuinely stronger, connected to the same depth of processing that characterizes the trait across all domains. The emotions of others are almost equally real. This is the empathic dimension of high sensitivity, the way that another person's emotional state creates a direct emotional response in the HSP, not just an intellectual recognition of it. Watching someone struggle or suffer is not just uncomfortable in an abstract way. It produces something closer to a direct emotional echo, a felt sense of the other person's pain or anxiety or grief that is visceral rather than conceptual. This quality makes highly sensitive people extraordinarily attuned companions. They notice when something is wrong before it is said. They respond to emotional nuance with genuine understanding. They remember emotional details of interactions long after the factual content has faded. In friendships, in partnerships, in parenting, in caregiving roles, this depth of emotional attunement is a profound gift. It is also one of the most demanding aspects of being highly sensitive. Being genuinely moved by other people's emotions means that spending extended time with people in distress is not just emotionally heavy but physiologically costly. It means that watching the news, witnessing conflict, being in environments of emotional tension generates real internal distress. It means that the protective distance from others' suffering that most people manage automatically is significantly harder for an HSP to maintain. One of the most important things to understand about high sensitivity is what it is not. It is not the same as anxiety disorder, though highly sensitive people may be more prone to anxiety in certain environments. The trait itself is not pathological. It is a normal variation in nervous system sensitivity that exists across the population. Many highly sensitive people are not particularly anxious. They have simply learned to understand their trait and to structure their lives in ways that work with it rather than against it. It is not the same as introversion, as discussed earlier. Roughly 30% of highly sensitive people are extroverted. They love social interaction and draw energy from people. But they still experience the processing load consequences of highly stimulating social situations in the same way that highly sensitive introverts do. It is not weakness or oversensitivity in the colloquial, dismissive sense. Telling a highly sensitive person to just toughen up, to stop being so sensitive, to not let things affect them so much. This advice misunderstands the nature of the trait. The sensitivity is not a choice or a habit. It is the way the nervous system is organized. Telling someone to process information less deeply is like telling someone to see colors less vividly. The experience is fundamental to the person, not a manageable preference. Research on the evolutionary value of high sensitivity suggests that the trait persists across species because it carries genuine advantages. In group living species, having individuals with deeper than average processing of environmental and social cues provides the group with better early warning of threats, better detection of subtle changes in the environment, and better reading of social dynamics. The highly sensitive individuals in a population serve a function. They notice things that others miss, and in environments where noticing things matters, this is a significant advantage. Living as a highly sensitive person in a world that was not designed with high sensitivity in mind requires a certain amount of self-knowledge and self-accommodation. Understanding which environments are draining and planning recovery time after them is not self-indulgence. It is management of a real physiological reality. Choosing work environments and social settings with attention to stimulation levels is not avoidance. It is sensible self-knowledge. Building enough quiet time into a schedule to allow the nervous system to decompress is not laziness. It is maintenance of the same kind that any system under intensive use requires. Many HSPs find that their sensitivity becomes increasingly manageable as they understand it better. The experiences that were confusing or distressing without a framework for understanding them, the unexplained exhaustion after social events, the disproportionate impact of criticism, the way other people's moods seem to land in their own body, make sense when understood as the consistent, predictable consequences of a nervous system that is organized differently from most. The things that drain you are also the source of the things that make you extraordinary. The depth that makes overstimulation so exhausting is the same depth that makes your connections with the people you care about so meaningful. The empathy that makes other people's pain so difficult is the same empathy that makes you the person others instinctively trust with their hardest moments. The sensitivity to detail that makes harsh environments so uncomfortable is the same sensitivity that allows you to experience beauty with a richness that most people never fully access. High sensitivity is not a flaw to overcome. It is a way of being in the world that has its costs and its extraordinary gifts. And understanding it is the first step toward living it well. Like and subscribe to Freud Mind for more.